Hey, it's Tony Sweet and Captain Ron with Truth Be Told. We hope you guys are having a great day because we have a great day for you because we have an amazing guest. He's going to be a speaker at the Contact in the Desert this year, which is only a month away, and we hope you get your tickets. And we have Eric Rankin, who is credited with discovering a significant and previously unknown connection between geometry, wasn't good in geometry in school, by the way, and harmonics, where geometric forms provide the information needed to build a numerical perfect major chord, the most melodic form of music. Eric's research seems to prove that if Plato's description of God as the great geometer was correct, then the entire universe is acting as a symphony, working with literally harmony with itself. So I know Captain Ron has been just chewing at the bits for this one because he loves that synchronicity. So yeah, please welcome to Truth Be Told, Eric Rankin.
Hi, Eric.
I think you heard the applause.
It's going great, man. We really are excited about this. We saw the film, and this is just a mind blower, Tony. This is stuff that you would never even think about. It's so outside of our normal realm of things we talk about. Eric, would love to jump right in because we need a day with you. We only have an hour, so we really want to get into this. I think the best place we should start is to go back and why don't we start with the Sumerians 6,000 years ago and talk about the 12 and the basis of the math, and that'll kind of set the stage. Unless you don't.
That is a perfect place to start because we all know base 10 countings would seem to make the most sense. We have 10 fingers, 10 toes. Metric system is based on base 10, but we were guided to a counting system much longer ago than that, 6,000 years ago in Sumeria, which is modern day Iraq. They teach this counting system to kids in India, but it's based on 12s and 60s. And you end up counting the knuckles or pads on your four long fingers with one hand. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you hold 12 5 different times on the other hand. So you go to 5, 10, or 5 times 12, and all equals 60. But you start at 12, 24, 36, 48, and 60. So all of the 12s and 60s that we know of and deal with every day on our planet, and that includes the seconds in a day, a dozen eggs, a dozen disciples, all these 12s and 60s come from this counting system. And we are using it not miles. Our world is divided into 60 miles for 1 nautical degree. So we don't even know what is the system we're living in, and it is Sumerian, and we can read Sumerian. One of the greatest inventions other than this math system that the Sumerians gave us was the world's first complex written language that we deciphered and can read. So we go back and say, how did you people come up with these technologies? There's many others. It's not just writing and the math that led to algebra, but it's the world's first pyramid and the world's first multi-story building, the world's first pottery wheel, first wheeled and axled vehicle. These aren't advancements of technologies. These are inventions of technologies. And when we read their text and say, how did you do this one place, one time on the planet? And they said, we didn't. We were gifted by sky visitors who came and walked amongst us and gave us this information.
It is amazing. You never think of the 60 seconds and the 60 minutes in an hour. It seems so arbitrary, right, Tony? Why would it be 60 seconds?
That is a really good argument against what I created in our first video called Sonic Geometry. We had no idea we would get the response that we did from mathematicians and scientists and physicists who liked what was being presented, but ended up, the really smart ones, quote unquote, would say you're pulling a bunch of arbitrary systems together. You're pulling feet and miles, and you're pulling seconds and minutes, and when you could measure time however you wanted. You're pulling geometry, which is based on a circle of 360 pi wedges. It could be however many you want. So that was a good argument, and so we have to go back and say, is this really just a bunch of arbitrary information shoehorned to fit? Or is it something much bigger than that? And it ends up being, sorry, there's a fire truck going by. It ends up being much bigger than that, where it's master clocked into a giant movement that our planet makes called the precession of the equinoxes. It's a wobble. Our Earth wobbles like a top. That takes 25,920 years to complete. And all of a sudden, all the numbers that are in this counting systems of 12s and 60s and 360s and this 432 tuning grid people are becoming aware of, all of them become like tiny wheels against a giant master clock gear. And that master clock is the non-arbitrary wobble of our planet. So all of a sudden, we are talking about communication through the ages.
Can that? I mean, I hope I'm even on the right subject here. But when the Earth is supposed to flip the polar shift, how does the geometry affect that?
Well, that would be something different because
Tony's not paying attention to the show. He's
right.
Our Earth has a magnetosphere. We are a giant magnet. You have a magnetosphere. We are electrically currently charged beings. We have a toroidal field, and a toroidal field looks like intersecting a donut wheel almost.
Right.
And it has a magnetic polarity, negative on the north, positive on the south at the moment. We know that throughout history, those have flipped, but there isn't really a calculatable.
Okay. That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, thing that would fit into this particular grid.
Okay.
Well, before we just move on to the next thing, I wanted to ask you what your thoughts are on Zecharia Sitchin. Do you, in fact, have you looked at his work of studying these Sumerian texts?
It's interesting to me. There is so much literature written. We did not know 150 years ago. We did not even know about that there was going to be proof of this Sumerian culture. And then we found writing in tablets. They're clay tablets about the size of an iPad, written on with a little stylus. And there ends up being tens of thousands of tablets. So Zecharia Sitchin is one of the scholars who can decipher them and read them. I think he ended up pulling bits and pieces. I have to look at it the same way with a skeptical eye of what people have sort of accused me of doing is forming a hypothesis and then grabbing bits and pieces that support it. I don't read cuneiform, so I am not the person who could say absolutely true or absolutely not. It could be true. Sitchin's version is we became a slave race engineered by the Anunnaki sky visitors to mine gold. That could be true. Let's just say we were engineered, which I believe we were. Even a Christian story or a God story says we were created by a creator. So now we're just moving to a different version of what those creators were. We're engineered physical forms, animals that can do work but are conscious and can think, high thought process. If we were a slave race at the time, and in some ways we are still a slave race to many things, to money and fear and ideas of lack, but they may have gifted us the cheat codes to get out of this slave race mentality. And it seems like these number sequences and grids alluding to frequencies and harmonics are actually little time-released pills to help us up level when the time was right.
Totally. And Eric, I appreciate that that's not your area. I just want to throw that out there because it does relate to all the things we talked about here on Truth Be Told. But okay, let's move into some of these things because Tony, this is the part that blows your mind. It's just the math and the harmonic. It just lines up crazy. So let's start with, why don't we talk about maybe the degrees and shapes, like how each shape always has the same sum total degrees, correct?
Yes. Well, that you said you're not into geometry and math. I was not either in school. So that this information came to me was totally out of left field. But I literally heard a voice in my ear in my office building one day say, go draw a triangle on your whiteboard in your office. So I drew that triangle and I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I did it. It said, now write the sum totals of that triangle. And a triangle, no matter what it looks like, it could be a right triangle or an equilateral triangle. It will always total, those three angles will always total 180. And I'm like, well, okay, I wrote that down. I remembered that a triangle totaled 180. And then I heard, no, play that as a tone. And I'm like, play that as a tone. How would I do that? But you can do that on your iPhones. We have tone generating equipment on our iPhones, but you couldn't hear that. So I'm going to play you 180 and maybe you'll hear it. Can you hear that?
Yes, absolutely.
Sound like I got a text.
Sounds like a triangle.
Yeah. So there's 180, 180 vibration cycles per second sounds like. And I'm like, okay, I'm done. I drew the triangle, wrote down its sum total, and played the tone. And they're like, no, now you're going to move up the geometric sequence. And their next one would be a square.
360.
So all of a sudden, now there's a musical interval already in place of an octave. 180, 360. And I'm like, wow, a little bit of musical theory is already built into this. And they said, now go up to a pentagon. That's 540 degrees. And that's this note. Right away, I'm in a band. I've played music my whole life. I recognize that interval between this and this. That's a fifth. And I'm like, wow, now we're really talking about music. Moved up to a hexagon. That's another octave of the first tone. And then the septagon, 7 sides, will always total 900. And that's this. And now you have a major chord triad.
And the hexagon 720. So you got the
Yeah.
360 doubled to 720 for the hexagon, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
And then you have
Octagon.
10 for the octagon. You have 900 for the septagon and 1080 for the octagon, which is another version of this one, only higher. So all the primary geometric shapes would guide you to major chord harmonics. And there's something interesting going on that our ears and minds and bodies are already tuned to recognize when we hear a major chord, like, oh, everything's going right. Everything is coming together. In a movie, that's when the good things are happening. The couples are falling in love, or the king and queen, or they won the war. That's all major chord. So how is it that geometry is revealing this chord? And I thought, oh, I'm going to go learn about that. I'm going to go Google search it, or blog search it, or whatever. I couldn't find one correlation, not one mention that geometry reveals major chord harmonics. And that just seems like an impossible thing to have not been seen somewhere along the line.
Exactly. You think somebody somewhere would have done this.
Way smarter than me, for sure.
Or even like back in ancient Greece, somebody would have done this. Something, you always find these things, and there's nothing.
It's pretty wild. Now, remember, Pythagoras and them, they could not play hertz cycles per second. They could not play vibration cycles per second. They could work with ratios. That's what Pythagoras did. He took a string, plucked it, heard a tone, divided it in half, and heard twice as high a tone. That's the first octave. But we weren't available. Here's a crazy thing, going back to Sumeria. We were given the formula for how many seconds would be in a day 6,000 years ago. There's 86,400 seconds in a day. We did not have the technology to compute or calculate those seconds until about 140 years ago, when Ferdinand Hertz came up with the device. So it really does allude that we are the people we've been waiting for to put all this information together, the old stories, the stories of ancient visitors combined with our technology. And all of a sudden we are getting a big feedback loop that says, we already knew this and we've been trying to guide you to this information.
All right, let's talk about the 108 tone and how that makes us feel at home.
Okay, so 108, I have another chime set here. Excuse me for reaching over. 108 is an octave of 432. So this is a D chord of 288, 360, 432. So a lot of people have been hearing about this tone, 432, tuning right in the middle of the keyboard. Today, that tuning is 440. But in ancient instruments, when you find old instruments that actually work, like flutes or things that could be hundreds and hundreds of years old, you will find this tone in almost all of them. An octave down of that is 216. An octave down of that is 108.
See how it's always cutting in half? It's like this math.
Cutting in half is octaving down, doubling is octaving up. So 108 is the same note as 432, just 2 octaves below it. Now we get into, how does 108 play into things? Well, if you're back into royal measurements, inches and feet, you play around with those, the moon's radius is 1080. That's a crazy coincidence. Double this 2060, the diameter of the moon. You take 108, double it to 216, double again 432. You square 432, you're at the speed of light in miles per second. Remember, royal measurement, which was Sumerian based, per second, which is Sumerian based.
Hold on, you're just throwing these out so fast it's going right past me and I'm sure most people listening. Okay. But one of my very favorite topic that we discuss on this show is synchronicities. And there are synchronicities within these numbers from the equinox, the precession of the equinox, to the distance of the moon, the diameter of the moon. Why don't you point out a few of those to us sort of slowly so that people can kind of grasp onto it?
Okay, well, let's just take the first one that jumped out at me, which was 2160.
Right.
2160 is the sum total of a cube, 6 squares. And I'm like, I remember 2160, and maybe it was from Jeopardy. Jeopardy is the diameter of the moon. So now we're talking about geometry when measured by 360 degrees of a circle overlay. And we're talking about the moon measured in miles. That's crazy. 2160 happens to be the length of an astrological age. All of our astrological ages are 2160 years long. And then 2160 is the harmonic fifth of the angle. So here's 4 different disciplines that all are arriving at the exact same number. And that's when it started opening me up to, it's not just music we're talking about. We're talking about a bed, a giant bed of coincidence, synchronicity, numerical values.
Even the 216 of the 2160 is half of the 432.
Same number sequence. That's what you almost have to look at, is the number sequence itself. So 108, half that again. 108 is all over the place in Hinduism. There's 108 when people wear those mala necklaces. There's exactly 108 beads, and they repeat mandala or mantras and mudras 108 times. It's like, and 72 is on this same grid that in my videos we call the factor 9 grid. It's a D note, but 72 is featured in every single major religion, from Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, 72 names of God, and then you double that and you get 144. There's 144,000 chosen ones in the apocalypse. I mean, there's some knowingness that is speaking to us through number sequences.
It is interesting. And even the number of the precession of the equinox, wasn't it 25,920?
Yes.
Something like that.
2592 is a number in this factor 9 grid. Just take the zeros off. 2592 is a number perfectly nestled. It's an E tone in this grid. So it's almost spooky phenomenon of synchronicity and coincidence. But the question is, what do we do with these numbers? And what it seems like they're guiding us to is that these harmonic triads are embedded in these number codes. The Sumerians left us what's called a king's list of telling a story of all these kings that lived in the region for tens of thousands of years. And it just so happens in their document, this thing called the Sumerian Kings List, the first king lived for 288, the second king lived for 360, and the third king lived for 432. 6,000-year-old document listing that chord numerically in perfect order. So it seems like, there it is, thank you. So it seems like we are supposed to know some information, and that information seems to be pointing to musical harmonics.
It almost sounds like the Bible code, like this,
Yes.
you hear that, how it's supposed to be weaved in there. Didn't Isaac Newton do some kind of work with royal cubics or sacred measurements?
Yeah, well, we've been a little bit in debate of what are the royal measurements. An inch, it makes sense. We hear the word a foot, and that's because a foot was approximately 12. Remember, we're breaking things down to 12. 12 of these things we called inches. There were a lot of different measuring systems before the royal measurement system became
standardized.
We had the cubits, the ark in the Noah's Ark was measured in cubits. And that was the length, I think, from your elbow to the tip of your finger was a cubit. And then we have, of course, metrics. We have meters and kilometers. But it is when you stick to the royal measurement system that only a very small portion of the world now uses, Britain and the United States. But it's only when you stay in those does all of this information just blossom into the same interconnected flower where all of the information is communicating with itself in the most bizarre way.
It's incredible how it all ties together like that.
Totally.
You know, I also have heard you talk about how vibrations tie in for this, because harmonics affect the vibrations, and then they can affect the water. Could you tell us that story about how the guy studied these vibrations in water, and he screamed and yelled at one cup of water, and then he was very affectionate and loving to the other kind of water, and then he froze them? What happened?
Right. That's you're referring to Dr. Masaru Emoto.
That's it, Emoto, yep.
And interviewing in his hotel room privately for about 3 hours before he passed away. And he conducted this experiment. Now we're talking about something a little bit differently, of the power of thought. Remember, if you break things down in physics and you keep going smaller and smaller and smaller, we stop existing. All we can get to is atoms, and atoms are just little tiny containers of energy. So our thought, he deduced, could be a thing as much as we are. Thoughts are invisible. And if you break us down to our smallest components, we would be as invisible as well. But what if a thought is a thing? And he tested it on water. He would send loving energy. He had 3 vials of water. He would send loving energy to one, hate energy to another, and totally ignore the third. And then he flash froze them after quite a while of exposure. And then slowly, as they were thawed, he looked at them under a spectrum microscope and saw the water that was loved was thawing in this way that revealed beautiful hexagonal geometry, like a hexagon, like snowflakes. And the water that was hated was all blobby. And this is a rice element version instead of water, what we're looking at here. And then nothing also was affected. It's like nothing wanted to be ignored either. And so people it was hard for people to conduct the experiment with water because they didn't have the microscopes, but you can conduct it with rice and look at it. And people have done this experiment. You can go to YouTube and look at Emoto rice experiment and see that people all over the world by the hundreds have conducted it and gotten very similar results.
Crazy, right, Tony?
It is fascinating.
Now you say that, the major chord sounds right to our ears.
Yeah.
Why did we move off of that 432, which is what it should be as the center, and we moved into 440? Why did that happen, do you think?
Well, there's a lot of theories. Music tuning was not always even 432. It is interesting to note that the keynote to tune our instruments, as soon as we started building complex instruments, was this around 432, 440, 428. And we kind of played with it for a while, but for a long time, 432 tuning was official concert pitch tuning. And then it came time to we're traveling around the world and the tuba player from America wants to be able to play with the orchestra in Europe. So we're going to have to standardize tuning. At that moment of standardizing, it went from concert pitch to 440, from 8 cents, from 432 to 440. And supposedly the theory was it sounded a little brighter and maybe would reach a little further into arenas. But if you go down a conspiracy alley, not very far, and you said, all of this information is glued together. It's not just music, but all of this information that connects a sky visitor story, ancient wisdom, geometry, planetary measurements, all these different things. All you have to do is move us out of 432 tuning to 440. All of that information just vaporizes in front of your eyes. So let's say you're the small group that says, we want to hold this information unto ourselves and let everybody else just scramble around in the dark where there's no synchronicity or coincidence. Detuning would be the device that would do it.
So you think it was done intentionally, like maybe perhaps?
I think there's a possibility. You will never get an answer to that. At least I never have. I've gone down those paths and looked, and you always sort of get an answer that just sounds benign. The French treaty this, and you'll hear something about Nazis. And it is interesting that the moment that we became able to share frequencies in mass, meaning electronically, through things like radio and recordings, that was around the same very moment that tuning was changed. So it went, as soon as it became available to the masses, it was, if lack of a better word, dumbed down or made different, where this grid would not show up that connects so many things to so many other things related to nature, natural growth patterns, geometry, all these things. It just goes away when you detune numerically.
And what do you call this grid? Is this the 12 thing, or the 9? What is this?
I call it the factor 9 grid because every minute there's 14 tones, and they all will total 9, even if you go to infinity. The number might be, 5 feet long, but as it keeps reducing and you add the final 2 numbers together, or 3, it will total 9. So 432 equals 9, 180 equals 9, 144 equals 9. All of the numbers in the grid, every single tone, no matter what it is in this 14-tone grid, will total 9.
Well, Michael, we're going to take, Eric, we're going to take a quick break because we have to hear from our good friend George Norrie for the upcoming Contact in the Desert. So please take a moment and don't go anywhere. We'll be right back in just 60 seconds.
Join me, George Norrie, in Indian Wells, California, for the 7th Annual Contact in the Desert UFO Conference, May 31st to June 3rd. Contact in the Desert is an epic weekend of adventure filled with exciting explorations into ancient aliens, human origins, crop circles, UFO sightings, disclosure, and the newest evidence of ongoing contact. This amazing weekend offers over 50 lectures, 40 workshops, 8 exciting panels, special events, and a luncheon that I'm hosting. Contact in the Desert also features leading experts including Giorgio Tsoukalos, David Wilcock, Linda Moulton Howe, Michael Tellinger, Eric von Daniken, Doc Wallach, and many more important researchers and scientists in the field. Contact in the Desert is your place for inside information. Join us at thecontactinthedesert.com to get your tickets today. It's time to make contact. That's contactinthedesert.com. Don't miss it. Contactinthedesert.com.
We are back on Truth Be Told. Tony Sweet and Captain Ron. And can we, Eric, we're with Eric Rankin, excuse me. And Eric, if you could, here's the Factor 9 grid. Tony's going to put that up. Do you want to I just don't want to blow past this because this is sort of a fascinating thing.
So this is our first grid from our first video. And my partner in this, Alana Luna, I was on vacation. I think I was actually at Burning Man when she just said, we just got to get this out for the autumnal equinox. So it actually has a couple of mistakes in it. Right in the very top center, you'll see the number 304, and you go, wait a minute, that doesn't total 9. There's about 3 mistakes in that grid that a lot of our fans noticed, and we corrected on our next version in the high def. But every other note in there, and in fact, every single tone will reveal 9. So you can go to any number you want. On the far right, you can see 2592. That would total 18, and then 18 is 1 plus 8, and that equals 9. Or 378. Any of those numbers will total or reduce to 9.
It's interesting. And then also they have a harmonic relationship with that number as well.
Many of them will. You can build 3 perfect triads in that tone. And there's a big difference when we talk about numerically perfect triads, because we might be getting a hint when we talk about the tri-nature of creation or of God, Father, Son, Holy Ghost, the Holy Trinity. If you're thinking in frequency, there is a Holy Trinity. We call it coming home in music, and it is that major chord. A major chord can be mathematically perfect, divided into ratios, but what we do, and it starts getting a little complex sounding, but in modern tuning of modern instruments, we no longer get to hear numerically perfect chords, whether it's a major chord triad or not. So nature, the Fibonacci cycle that begins the launch of plants and spirals, you've probably talked about it on your show, that the first 6 steps of that will reveal the same major, numerically perfect major chord. So it seems like that's really critical. If music does this many things, or frequency does this many things, the music you listen to would be this much of it. The rest of it is how frequency is moving through us, how cells are being created, how energy is holding into place to become standing waveform and become us and trees and planets and stars. It seems really important that we get the numerics and the ratios and the harmonics exactly right. If it's not exactly right in cell division, it's cancer. And then cancer keeps dividing imperfectly, and that's more cancer. But if it stays perfectly harmonic, it stays perfectly harmonic as it expands. And that seems really important to our story, and we are no longer on it. No matter what music you listen to around the world with equal temperament tuning, it could be shaking the foundation of our cellular structure apart.
It's reminiscent too of this all being ancient harmonics, because there's often a lot of talk in this world about possibly how the blocks were moved for the pyramids and things was harmonically, that it actually lifted the stones, etc.
It's one of the best explanations that we can think of right now. We can levitate with sound. Right now, we can only levitate very small things with sound, but we can. Well, we're limited in our technology at the moment, but what if we can scale up to levitate ever larger things with ever larger, technologically more advanced equipment? Someday we might be able to levitate a giant block. And whether it was how it was built or how it was used, it seems like, especially the pyramids, were frequency machines, built by frequency, and frequency was their purpose.
You kind of blew by this Fibonacci spiral too. Every one of these little things you mentioned could be like an hour show, but you're just blowing through these, and it's like it's a lot to take in. But
I understand.
Why don't you just kind of give us a quick thing on what that golden spiral is and everything? Because
Right. So it's a very simple algorithm. If people have heard of the golden ratio or the Fibonacci spiral or sequence, it's actually very simple. It starts with 0, and then it moves forward by 1. And that's all you need to know. You take the last two things, add them together to get the next thing. So 0 plus 1 is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. 2 plus 3 is 5. 5 plus 3 is 8, on into infinity. That is the Fibonacci sequence, is the two previous numbers added together to get to the next. And when a seed sprouts, it seems to understand that spiral, and whether it's succulents or trees or flower designs or
seashells,
yes, you're going to see revealed the Fibonacci sequence. So it's highly significant. We are built with all kinds of Fibonacci golden ratio. So the golden ratio is take a number and then work backwards. Yeah, so there you go. So if you were to take you start from 0 right there. Oh, now we're going down. We're showing how it keeps going. The Fibonacci sequence will keep going in both directions, infinitely inward and infinitely outward.
That's what she said. Go ahead, Eric.
Well, and then you're seeing some numbers there. Those times numbers get a little bit confusing, but it's a very simple algorithm that nature seems to be following. But what was fascinating to me is the first 6 steps. Actually, the launching pattern is numerically perfect harmonics. Once again, bringing us back into a musical term. So if our universe is geometric, the way physicists are saying it is, and geometry reveals harmonics, now we're making a statement that the universe is geometric, geometric reveals harmonic. We are living in a literal harmonic universe. We're living in a universe that is working with itself in a beautiful way, whether it's how stars are built or anything happens. And then the only thing outside of that harmonics seems to be us at the moment, that we're exposed to these harmonic ratios. We're built according to harmonic ratios. We follow them, but we're not living within them, thinking of the entire picture. We know that we live on a fragile planet with a fragile ecosystem, but we're not living like we know that. We're throwing and dumping our trash, and we're destroying things, and we're whipping minerals and not being able to replace them. We're poisoning our home planet. That is living outside of the awareness that it seems like the rest of nature is living within.
All these physicists keep talking about saying that everything is vibrations anyway.
Yes.
So it's amazing how this all ties in and how you found the way to tie harmonics into this. Would you happen to be familiar with a gentleman named Edward Nightingale?
No,
I'm not either, but I came across him, and I think that it's just the way you've explored this math. He has looked at the Great Pyramid and the whole complex at Giza and came up with a template, and he can use that like he's used it on Oak Island and other places in the world, and it all matches up, and it just feels very similar to what you're talking about here. Why don't we move on to the Integratron?
Okay. So the Integratron is not far from Contact in the Desert. It used to be much closer, but now it's about an hour's drive from where Contact in the Desert is in Indian Wells. I will be leading a group out to the Integratron on Thursday. I think it's May 30th. We will be visiting a place called Giant Rock and the Integratron, where a man named George VanTassel said he was made a close encounter of the third kind, where he actually stood face to face with an extraterrestrial visitor who looked humanoid. And he took him aboard his ship and his craft, and he explained some things. And at the end of their visit, there's Giant Rock, the world's largest freestanding granite boulder. And behind that is about 100-foot tall hill made out of a white quartz crystal. We will be visiting all these sites on May 30th. It's very exciting. It's almost sold out. I think we have almost 120 people already signed up, but there might be a few left. So,
yeah, our very own Tony Sweet was there last year. You went to the Integratron, right, Tony?
I did. I had a great time.
Did you take like a sound bath, or would you actually?
We did a sound bath in the Integratron. It was very.
I'm glad you took a bath at all.
I know, right? But it was very spiritually connected. Put it that way. Yeah.
He's trying to say he cried, and he didn't want to say that on the air, but
Captain Ron wasn't there to cuddle.
I wasn't there to cuddle, so he did cry. So what is the experience like inside of there?
Well, it's a 2-story dome. It's been called the world's most perfectly acoustic wooden dome. Frequency does crazy things there, but beyond that, electronics do crazy things. There's the top floor. It's divided into 16 parabolic arcs, and then you can see that round donut at the top. That's a 1-ton donut of cement, and it's a tension structure. No metal fasteners were used to hold the Integratron together when it was built. No nails, no screws. It's a tension structure where all those parabolic sections are held together by the weight of that cement circle up there.
Now, if this was 12, it should have been 12, not 16.
Well, it's a very octagonal building. It's built on 8s instead of 12s, but it is an incredible place. That's the downstairs floor. I lead workshops. I'm going out there this weekend with a group, a private workshop, and we do a frequency session downstairs in this section and a frequency section upstairs. This was where it was called a Cellular Rejuvenation Machine. Many people don't know that downstairs is where that cellular rejuvenation process was supposed to happen. No humans were ever supposed to go up into the dome where we get our sound baths today, but we do it because it's so acoustically amazing. Maybe we become part of the frequency generation process, but we want people to experience it downstairs as well.
That's pretty awesome. No, I have you had any experiences like when I went? I went with Shar Margolis, who is a psychic medium, but I actually had visions of extraterrestrials and just other beings when I was doing my sound bath.
Yeah, you're far from being alone. We actually have pictures that I cannot explain. I'm very skeptical when people show me their orb pictures and things, and I usually sure it's dust particles and things, but there are pictures outside of the Integratron while we were doing one of our experiments where you see these spiraling light columns with a little white dot in the center of them, and there's numerous ones. So it almost looks like a shell a little bit of light, and you can see the leading ring of this spiral. No idea what this is, but people from kids to adults and skeptics to believers have said they've seen communicated with beings, light body beings at the Integratron while frequency sessions are happening.
Wow.
Interesting. Why don't you show us a little bit? You got these models there behind you of these.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and show us some of that.
Well, yeah, this one here, this is a significant model here that Buckminster Fuller, he did not discover, but he's credited, much like with the geodesic dome, he's credited with discovering. This is called the vector equilibrium. And he called this the geometry of the universe. And he arrived at it by stacking 12 balls around one. So here we're back to the significance of 12. There's a core ball in the middle and 12. But when you skin it with straight line geometry, you get this. So I thought, well, that's pretty cool. But I met an artist after our video named Michael Evans, and he is known for promoting this shape. Leonardo da Vinci drew a very similar shape 500 years ago, but he calls it the Trion Ray. So I took this, this is the world's true smallest containment, geometric containment field right here. So I built one of these shapes using this, and instead of the vector equilibrium, it is the Trion Ray equilibrium.
It's a cannabis leaf. We can see it.
Almost. It's 12 points.
Oh, 12.
And I don't think I could get far enough away, but if you build out...
I say that to Tony every day. I don't think he can get as far enough away from me, but that's okay.
There you go. So if you were looking for it, you could see the triangle here being formed, and then you can see the square here, the 4 petals forming it.
Yep.
It's the exact same shape as the one Buckminster Fuller showed you, but it's pulse. It goes back to frequency. Each one of these, imagine, is the first pulse emanating from source. And all of a sudden, the grid that this builds, this exact cluster, builds sacred geometry in 4 dimensions. And it's...
what do you mean by that? You mean harmonically? What do you mean it builds?
Well, I'm going to try and show you. I'm going to step off camera for a second and twist my camera around a little bit.
Our guest has left the show, so Tony and I are going to... Oh, no, he's back. I'm sorry.
So I'm back. I'm going to show you a big sculpture that
Look
I made.
at this. You have a lot of time on your hands, Eric.
Yeah, I do. So imagine this. This is the vector equilibrium core, but using frequencies. And I built the top of it. Here's the same little star cluster at the top. And then I let it follow its own trajectory down. When we got to the bottom, I realized it revealed sacred geometry perfectly.
Oh my God! You have to have a degree in what to figure this out, to understand this?
Cleaners.
My gosh!
It was the quickest way of being able to visualize the stuff, but it seems like 2D sacred geometry was always another hint, another breadcrumb clue to get us to recognize something are more advanced about our awareness of the universe we're living in.
Now, have you shown this to mathematicians and people like that? What do they say to you about this?
I've had many mathematicians visit me in my apartment here in Laguna Beach. One of the most recent was Manas Kafatos. He wrote "You Are the Universe" with Deepak Chopra, New York Times bestseller. He was in my apartment looking at the structure I just showed you and said, that is a perfect model of the quantum universe.
Wow.
I never took physics or geometry ever past high school.
That's crazy.
It's just like you stumbled into this thing and you ran with it.
I ran with it. I had no choice. It was guiding me. I could have decided to ignore it, but I would be being untrue to what was happening, that this information was coming and I had to stay on the path. And that path keeps expanding. People now all over the world, I hear from people weekly that are doing work related or providing a puzzle piece that fits into this. Graham Hancock, he's going to be, believe he's going to be at Contact in the Desert.
He is.
He's one of my favorite speakers.
Agreed.
And recently, he was on Joe Rogan's show, and he reminded his audience that the Great Pyramid of Giza, if you take the height of it from the base to the top and you multiply it times 43,200, you get the height of our planet from the equator to the North Pole. If you take the base of the Great Pyramid and multiply it by the same 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of our planet. Impossible.
Impossible.
Measurements. and they're built into the Great Pyramid of Giza, 432. It's almost like it's a giant placeholder getting us to notice how important 432 is.
Again, 432, exactly. This is why I think that's the guy's name, Edward Nightingale. I think you need to look into that, because I think you need to play with the Great Pyramid dimensions, because there's a lot more. It's it's really not a 4-sided thing. It's an 8-sided thing, and it's exactly the curvature of the Earth. And also that golden number, that golden ratio is built into the Great Pyramid.
Yes. Right. Those things I do know. I didn't know it from him, but those things I do know.
It's astonishing.
Did you have like you know how a lot of people that have near-death experiences or something come back, they come back with like these, psychic abilities or stuff. Did you have like an experience to where this information just got activated?
It's funny. That's an interesting question. I did not get dropped on my head or
kicked in the bull by a bull.
But I did have, when I was 34 years old, I did have a debilitating spinal injury. And I was scheduled for surgery that was very extreme, cutting the front of your throat and moving your voice box and jugular veins, vertebrae, and removing the disc. And I don't share this story all that often, but I was actually contacted by what I would call an extraterrestrial visitor or an angel or something. And I just said, I'm very afraid of this process and where I'm at, and I can barely walk. And this feminine voice said, I'm going to fix you up. I'm not of your planet, I'm not of your dimension, but I'm here now, and you are going to be fixed. And she did something that I could feel in the back of my neck. I felt like a tool going in and twisting and spreading my vertebrae apart and removing. Next, I felt 100% fine. That was 25 years ago. I've never had a back pain or injury since. And that opened up a field of knowing that something else is going on our planet, and we are waking up to whatever that is in our own way, right?
I hope you share that at Contact in the Desert, because those people will not think anything of it. And we've had people on here like Sonia Grace, for example, that have talked about this, that they do remote surgeries, or people have felt that they've had surgery done on them like that. And you're a living, breathing proof of feeling that way.
Well, it happened. I mean, I had all the scans. I had the MRIs and the MGs and all that stuff, and showed them to my doctor. And he says, I have no idea how this could possibly be, but I'm happy for you that you don't need this surgery. But something happened, and I was in communication, in thought. I didn't see anyone like George VanTassel did, but I certainly heard a voice that followed me for a while. And I asked numerous questions, but that was the beginning of, I was a yacht broker driving around in a Corvette in 1995. And now I'm guy building pipe cleaners and speaking.
Other guys, even Einstein and who's the rocket guy from from Germany?
I'll think of his name. Von Braun.
Von Braun. Those guys both said, even I said they've heard voices that told them to do this or whatever. Then they write down those things.
So did Tesla.
Tesla too. Exactly.
Yeah, Tesla would get these blinding light experiences that gave him these huge migraine headaches. But when he got them, so let's talk about Tesla, a fascinating fact, because Tesla was the guy who said, if you understand energy, vibration, frequency, you're going to understand the primary forces at work in building the universe. But Tesla had no problems. He believed he was receiving information extraterrestrially, and it hurt him. It hurt his brain. He would get these flashes of blinding white light. But Tesla did not invent in the way that we call inventing. Thomas Edison, to invent the light bulb, took 500 tries to find a filament that would work in a vacuum clear tube of some sort. Tesla created the dynamo that creates energy the way we still use it today, first try. He saw a working model of it in his brain. He could rotate it around in his brain. He saw it dimensionally. He built the first one, and it worked perfectly.
That's absolutely amazing. Tony, that's what I call a quick hour.
That it went really fast, and
that was an hour.
And again, I could tell everybody, just because we ran out of time here, you can go to Contact in the Desert and see a lot more information. So tell us some more, a little bit more about coming up on Contact. When is this going to happen? You say there's a few tickets left. Speaking
with my good friend Michelle Anderson, we co-host a radio show called Awakening Code Radio here in Laguna. We will be hosting a trip out to Giant Rock, where contact was made, the very first contact in the desert. was with George VanTassel and Ashtar Command at Giant Rock. So we will be visiting that site. We can take up to 120 people who will be caravanning in their own cars from Indian Wells, the hotel, out to Giant Rock. Some of those people have already booked the sound session that I will be hosting, a little very quick session, mini sound bath and a mini session downstairs. And then Friday at 11 o'clock, I will be giving a lecture at Contact in the Desert.
Great. Well, we can't wait to see you there. And for everybody, just go to contactinthedesert.com, get your tickets. If you can't make it, we're going to be there, and we're going to, try to share as much information as we can. But thank you, Eric, so much for being on Truth Be Told.
Absolutely.
We really appreciate it.
Really
Thank
fun.
you.
So fascinating.
Thanks very much, guys. Thanks for spreading the information.
Oh, you got it. And, all right, guys, we'll see you at Contact. Please go to truthbetoldworldwide.com. Check out all of our upcoming guests, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, we'll see you then. Bye.